Okay, everybody. So today we're going to be reviewing how to solve quadratics for their roots using discriminants. Now, roots are the x-intercepts of the graph, and those are the values that make the equation equal to 0. So when I have parabolas, I can have parabolas that don't have any roots, don't cross the x-axis at all, never hit 0. They can come down and just touch once, or they can come down and actually cross twice, cross the x-axis twice. So sometimes we get 2 solutions, sometimes we get 1 solution, and sometimes we get no solutions. So we'd like to figure that out. So make sure your notes are titled For Two Quadratics, and let's get in. All of this should be reviewed from Algebra 2, and or maybe, probably Algebra 1. So our quadratics are of this form. Quadratic equations are ax squared plus bx plus c, so a quadratic, a x squared or a parabola graph. And so a, b, and c are the coefficients of those individual terms. C is the constant term, so make sure you jot that down. And the discriminant is a value that is calculated by taking b squared minus 4ac. That is called the discriminant. And you might even want to put that on your blue card. And if the discriminant is positive, you're going to get 2 solutions. 2 zeros, 2 x-intercepts. If the discriminant is equal to 0, you only get 1. And if the discriminant is negative, that calculation of that number is negative, you're going to get no x-intercepts. So you might want to put this chart into your notebook or on your blue card, and especially what this discriminant, this calculation is. So make sure you pause me now because I'm going to move on to our examples. It is positive, I'm going to get 2 solutions. Okay, so before we actually get to solving them, we want to solve equations that are equal to 0. That's solving it for its roots, or its x-intercepts. And we have 4 different methods. One method of solving a quadratic is what you've been practicing, is factoring. And all of the factoring that you've been doing on those practice worksheets have given you 2 solutions. So there's other methods of using, if you probably remember, the quadratic formula. And we want to maybe write what the quadratic formula is. So again, if this is my equation set equal to 0, quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we'll use that. That always works. Another method is completing the square, and we'll review how to do that. Probably not the most efficient way, but another method. And the 4th method is good old graphing. Graphing it and maybe using our calculator and finding those roots. All right, so let's take a look at an example and track the discriminant. So I want to take this equation and solve it by using all 4 methods. So let's first do it by factoring. So I'll break this down. So 0 equals x squared plus 3x minus 10. And you probably at this point should be able to do this, practicing it. Between 2 numbers that multiply to negative 10, but add to positive 3. So what would those 2 numbers be? Multiply to negative 10, so 5 and 2, but it's got to add to positive 3. I think that works. And zero product property says if 2 things multiplied together equals 0, either one of those could be 0. So we set both expressions equal to 0 and solve for x, and there I go. I get 2 solutions. Now what I didn't do first, and that I should do, is I should be figuring out what is the discriminant. Let's pause and do that. Let's see that indeed we were going to be getting 2 solutions. So the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. So let's just do a check here. A is the number out in front of x squared, that's 1. B is 3, the coefficient of the x, and C is negative 10. So if I put that into b squared, so it's 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 10. So that's 9. 4 times negative 1, so that's negative 40. So plus 40 gives me 49, and 49 is positive. And if I go back, so I'm going to get two solutions. And I did. There they are. So now let's do the quadratic formula. So you've got it written on your card. So it's x equals the opposite of b, so negative 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, make sure your root symbol goes all the way across, all over 2 times a. So let's simplify. Now simplifying what's underneath of the radical, well, wait a second, that looks familiar. B squared minus 4ac, isn't that what I just did? Well, that's 49 then. And we know the square root of 49 is 7, so 3 plus or minus 7 over 2. So now I'm going to get two solutions, one where I add and one where I subtract. So let's get both of them. So 1x is negative 3 plus 7 divided by 2. So what is that? That's going to be 4 divided by 2. That's 2. And one's going to be negative 3 minus 7 divided by 2. And that is going to be, what's that? Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. And there we go. We got the same solutions as I did a minute ago. We should, because it's the same quadratic equation, just using a different method. Now eventually you'll be able to choose which method you want. We're just going to review them all. All right, so equation, let's go on and let's do it the last two ways, which is completing the square and graphing. All right, and I'll show you my way of doing completing the square. If you have a way that you remember from your Algebra 2 teacher, you can do that too. So the first thing that I do is I rewrite the equation and I put the 0 on the other side. 3x minus 10 equals 0. So I'm going to move, the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to add the 10 over to the other side. And I'm going to leave space for a new number. That new number we're going to calculate by taking half of the b term and square it. So half of b and square it. So what is b? b is 3 divided by 2, and I'm going to square that. Well, that gives me 9/4. So I'm going to add 9/4. Don't be thrown off by fractions, no big deal. Now, that's imbalancing the equation, so I'm going to have to add 9/4 to the other side to keep my equation balanced. Well, now I'm going to go and factor the left side. Oh my gosh, Mr. Kodak, I can't factor that. That's impossible. I got fractions. We never had fractions here. Well, think about it. I need two numbers that multiply to 9/4 but add to 3. Well, just think of where I got the 9/4 from. I got the 9/4 from squaring 3 halves. This number, before you square it, is 3 halves times 3 halves is 9/4. And 3 halves plus 3 halves, well, 3 halves is just 1 1/2. 1 1/2 plus 1 1/2 is 3. This, you never have to think about the factoring because it's always half of b. It's always that value before you square it. So that's pretty easy. Now this, I'm just going to get a common denominator. 10 is 40/4. I can't write that in there. 40/4, that's 10. So I get 49/4. All right, if you need your calculator to do some of the fractions, go for it, but I think we'll be okay. Not all of these will have fractions. So now if you can see what I'm doing, it's the same factor, so I'm going to write it once and square it. Now my goal here is to get x by itself. So how do I get x by itself? Well, I got a squared here, so I'm going to have to square root both sides. So I'm going to get x plus 3 halves. Now the square root of 49/4, well, that's going to be, first of all, I'm taking a square root, so I've got plus or minus. And square root of 49, whoops, isn't 9. Square root of 49 is 7. And square root of 4 is 2. Last thing I got to do is to solve for x is to subtract 3 halves. So I'm going to get negative 3 halves plus or minus 7 halves. Well, now I'm going to get two answers. So negative 3 plus 7 divided by 2. So negative 3 plus 7, that's 4 divided by 2. Well, that's 2. And negative 3 minus 7, that's negative 10 divided by 2. And that's negative 5. There's my two solutions. Now, yes, that's a lot of work. So that's probably one of our least favorite methods. We may do one more here where we don't get those fractions. And the last way is graphing with our calculator. So really what you would want to do, and I can't do this right now with this method, is go in and graph this on your calculator. And you're going to be looking for the two intercepts, or the two zeros. And we should see that it's going to cross the x-axis at 2 and at negative 5. So once you graph this, you're then going to go to second calc and go to 0, which is number 2 in that menu. And it's going to ask you left bound, right bound, guess. Well, if you remember back last year, left bound, pick a point on the left, right bound, pick a point on the right. Guess, try to get really close, and then the calculator, after you hit enter, will tell you negative 5, 0. Same thing for 2. Left bound, right bound, and guess. We'll make sure that we practice these in class. So obviously, I'm going to get exactly the same roots I got for the others. All right, so let's at least do, first of all, let's get our discriminant and figure that out. So b squared minus 4ac. We'll just do one more here. So b is 8. A is the coefficient of x, that's just a 1, and c is negative 20. So 64 plus, because it's going to be a double negative, I think that's 80. So I think I get 144, which is greater than 0, so I'm getting two solutions. So two solutions. Well, so we could go in and we could factor. You probably are okay with factoring. Quadratic formula, again, you could just throw the values into the quadratic formula. Graphing, finding the x-intercepts, we could use our calculator. Let's practice the completing the square. That's the one that usually gives people the trouble. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I'm going to move the 20 over to the other side. Oops, 8x. And so I'm going to add 20 over to the other side. And then I want to find what this special number is that's missing here. Now, as I said before, that's just going to be half of b, so 8 divided by 2 squared. So half of 8 is 4, 4 squared is 16, so plus 16 on both sides. The reason why we do that is that when I go to factor this next step, by the way, the right side is just 36, no fractions, nice and easy. I need two numbers that multiply to 16, but add to 8. Well, that's pretty easy. It's 4, but again, I didn't have to guess that. This number before I square it is always this number that I'm going to put in my factors. And right here, when I write this once and square it, because it's the same factor always, that's the square of completing the square. Now I just have to solve for x. Square root both sides. Don't forget, square root of 36 is plus or minus 6. Subtract the 4 over, and now I'm going to get two answers. Negative 4 plus 6 and negative 4 minus 6. And there are my two roots, or my two solutions. So we're going to want to practice each of our methods here. And so you should, now if you have this worksheet, if I gave you the worksheet already, you can do them right on that worksheet. Otherwise, you can just do them in your notes. And these should work out nice because no fractions. These numbers are even numbers, so they should work out nice and neat. So you should be getting the same answers for all of them, and you should wind up then seeing my solutions online. And we'll keep practicing these over the next couple days.